Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on the legacies of the American War in Vietnam. I'm Chris Oppie, Director of the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Tonight's discussion is the third of four events in a series called Reckoning and Reconciliation, a conference on the Vietnam War and its legacies, to mark the 50th anniversary of the war's end. These four events explore crucial questions about the war's causes, conduct, and consequences. The capstone event will come on April 30th, a reading and talk by one of tonight's panelists, Phan, the acclaimed Vietnamese novelist and poet. She will appear in person at UMass, and her talk is free and open to the public. For more information and recordings of prior Ellsberg Initiative events, please go to our website, eipad.org. Let me also put in a plug for an issue of the Washington Spectator, which is coming out at the end of the month, called Reflections on the 50th Anniversary of the End of the Vietnam War. Among the contributors are four of tonight's panelists, Chuck Searcy, Susan Hammond, George Black, and Phan. The Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy is inspired by Daniel Ellsberg, whose papers are housed in the Robert Cox Special Collections and University Archives here at UMass. As most of you know, Ellsberg was a government official in the 1960s who supported the Vietnam War before turning radically against it. His opposition led him in 1971 to release to the press and public a 7,000-page secret history of the Vietnam War, the so-called Pentagon Papers, that exposed decades of government lies and deceit about the causes and conduct of that war. Less well known is that Ellsberg devoted the next 50 years of his life, until he died at age 92 in 2023, to principled nonviolent activism in pursuit of nuclear disarmament, First Amendment rights, and a more democratic, restrained, and diplomatic foreign policy. The example of his long life of activism is one of the important legacies of the Vietnam War. Our moderator is George Black, a British-born author and journalist. His most recent book, The Long Reckoning, A Story of War, Peace, and Redemption in Vietnam, was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice and was selected by Kirkus Reviews as one of the best books of the year. His previous 7 books are on a wide range of international, environmental, and historical topics, including U.S. policy in Central America and the Caribbean, and the Chinese democracy movement. He is now working on an oral history of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. His award-winning and widely published journalism has taken him to more than 24 countries in Asia, Latin America, and Europe. He has a master's degree from Oxford University, lives in New York City, and is married to author and Columbia University scholar Ann Nelson.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, I think we can see you, Layli. Thanks.
Great. Hi. Hello, everybody.
Well, perfect, because I'm now going to introduce you. But before I do that, let me encourage those who are watching to submit questions in the Q&A box. And in the last half hour, George will try to get to some of them.
Thank you. Yeah.
Layli Hayslip is a writer, humanitarian, philanthropist, and businesswoman. She was born in the village of Hoa Quy near the city of Da Nang and grew up amid the violence of war in Vietnam. She experienced almost every imaginable side of the war. As a young girl in the countryside, she sympathized with the liberation struggle, but ended up getting brutalized and tortured by both sides in the war. As a young teen, she fled the countryside to work in the cities of Saigon and Da Nang. Eventually, she met and married an American civilian contractor and moved to San Diego in 1970 to join him. In the late 1980s, she published a best-selling memoir about her life called When Heaven and Earth Changed Places, a Vietnamese woman's journey from war to peace. A few years later, she wrote a second memoir called Child of War, Woman of Peace, focusing on her first years in the United States. Hayslip has founded 2 charitable organizations, the East Meets West Foundation and the Global Village Foundation. Susan Hammond, the daughter of a U.S. Vietnam veteran, became interested in post-war Southeast Asia after traveling to Vietnam and Cambodia in 1991, shortly after graduating from Smith College. In 1996, After earning her MA in International Education from NYU, Susan returned to Vietnam to study Vietnamese. She became involved in fostering mutual understanding between the people of the US and Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, while working as the deputy director of the Fund for Reconciliation and Development. In 2007, Susan returned to her home state of Vermont and founded the War Legacies Project to continue addressing the long-term health and environmental consequences of war, including the impact of Agent Orange on Vietnam and Laos. In 2019, she received the Vietnam Order of Friendship Medal for her more than 2 decades of work in Vietnam. Chuck Searcy, who we're still waiting to connect from Vietnam, is a graduate of the University of Georgia. And he enlisted in the Army in 1966 and served in Vietnam in a military intelligence battalion. In the 1990s, Chuck returned to Vietnam as a representative of the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation and Veterans for Peace. He has lived in Hanoi most of the time since then. He's probably best known for founding Project Renew in 2001. The mission of Project Renew is to make Vietnam safe from the threat posed by unexploded ordnance, bombs, shells, and landmines that have remained in the land since the Vietnam War and have caused tens of thousands of deaths and injuries in the decades since 1975. Through educational programs and the training of rapid response teams that disarm the explosives, the number of casualties caused by them has dropped dramatically. In 2004, Chuck received the National Friendship Medal of the State of Vietnam, Vietnam's highest honor for foreigners who have served the country. Nguyen Phan Quay Mai was born and raised in Vietnam and is the author of 13 books written in both Vietnamese and English. Most recently, the global best-selling novels, The Mountains Sing and Dust Child, and the forthcoming work of poetry, The Color of Peace. Her writing has been translated into more than 25 languages and has received the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Award, the International Book Award, the Book Browse Best Debut Award, and the Lannan Literary Fellowship in Fiction. On top of that, she has a PhD in creative writing from Lancaster University in the United Kingdom. And for more information, you can easily find her website. It's simply her name without any dots between them, nguyenphanquaymai.com. So with many thanks to all of you, I now turn the discussion over to George Black. George.
Chris, thank you. And thank all of you. This is a great panel. I'm really happy to do this one. Some of my people I admire most in this field are on it. And I'm going to put in a plug for Chris while I'm on it, because I think a book I picked off the shelf again recently, I won't claim to have read every book on Vietnam, since there have been about 30,000, but I would say Patriots, Chris's book, has influenced me as deeply as any. It's why it relates to tonight, and I wanted to mention it tonight, is it's about the experience of all sides. And it's about the human dimensions of the war, the political dimensions, the voices. So in that sense, I think we've kind of got a miniature version almost of Patriots with this panel. I'll keep this to a fairly few questions because I want to mainly get you all to talk. And it was striking last week to me at the first of these panels at UMass, which was on the origins of the war. The panelists agreed that one of the things that was really neglected in all these many, many histories of the war is the experience of Vietnamese civilians. There's so much emphasis on the diplomacy, on the military, and the political shenanigans, but the experience of Vietnamese and how foreigners have interpreted and responded to the experience of Vietnamese civilians, I think is a unifying theme, because I think all of you, Lê Ly, Quay Mai, you write about those experiences. You write about them viscerally from the first person point of view. They're your families, they're your friends, they're the subjects of your fiction, your memoirs, your poetry. And I think Chuck and Susan, you both went to Vietnam with a perspective that a lot of people didn't bring, which was, what was the experience of civilians? What were the needs of civilians? And essentially, you came in with a question which was, what do you need? You didn't come in saying, here's what we're going to give you. You said, what do you need and how can we help? And I think that's shaped a lot of the most valuable work that's been done in the last, particularly the last 30 years, to reconcile the two countries. Our friend Lady Borton has a wonderful Vietnamese proverb that she likes to cite, which is, when you enter a family, follow its customs. When you enter a river, follow its flow. And I think that's really been a guiding principle for a lot of the work that's been done by Americans going back to Vietnam or going for the first time and asking those questions about what to help. What I thought would be interesting as a starting point is to wind the clock back 30 years, 35 years to a period where normalization with the US was beginning. The great economic reforms of Doi Moi were underway in Vietnam. There was the first big opening to the West. And all of you, I think, experienced that in different ways. Lei Li, your book came out When Heaven and Earth Changed Places, I think in 88. The movie came out 5 years later. Susan, that's when you began to go to Vietnam regularly in that period. It's when Chuck in 1994 decided to go back for good and has never left. And for you, Kwe Mai, being in a younger generation, I think you were emblematic of this generation that came to age as young adults, students, with all those advantages of the opening to the West suddenly available to you. So I think it would be interesting to get each of you to talk maybe for 2 or 3 minutes about how you recall that period, how you perceived it at the time, what you hoped for, what you thought you personally might be able to do to contribute to what came next. I mean, maybe Lei Li, since I began with your book, do you want to start on that?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes. I started as 1986. I did not know much about embargoes, the U.S. government embargoes against Vietnam. I only know that Americans did not like communists, did not have anything to do with Vietnam. I tried to present my book, and 21 different publishing houses turned it down. They say, we don't want to hear about the communists. We don't want to be on the communist side or enemy side. And all of those comments that make me work harder, try harder to make it being here. So in 1986, without knowing what Vietnam was like, because I came here in 1970, and so I just own 5 houses and a restaurant, and my children doing fine, everything good, but I'm very unhappy with inside of me, and that is when I start to thinking about Vietnam, and for some reason I need to go back there to see my mom and my family. But that trip, it shook me up for good. It really changed my life to see what the war have done to our motherland, the people, and the country, especially countryside. But then what the communists come in, and it no freedom. It just you know, you live in America here in San Diego, and you see everything that is going so well and so good. It's just like life is so perfect. And yet you took off and went to Vietnam, and you land in a place that you have at your motherland and everything, you know, everything, but the culture differences, the poorness, the condition, the starving. I mean, it's just so much for me to embrace with for 2 weeks. And after that, I came back. I thought I will be, you know, happy now that I can able to take care of my sons and live in America. But I just cannot turn my back away from my people, especially in that kind of condition. And so in 1988, I went back for the second time. I was lucky enough that I traveled with the Vietnam Veteran of America. And that is about 22 of us together. And that was really, I heard the word of the embargoes. I heard the word of the have to be reconciled. I heard the word that we need to open up and download on both sides. So that 2 weeks trip from Saigon to Da Nang to Hue, then to Hanoi. And after that, I learned a lot, especially in Hue, because it's 20 years after the Tet Offensive in 1968 to 1988, and that is 20 years. So we had in memory of party, and we talked to North Vietnamese and only one man. He came and he embraced of us, and here we had many veterans, some have PTSD. And that is when the Vietnamese man just came in, we can see that he had all the medal from head to bottom of him, and we all nervous. We don't know what's gonna happen. And after we sit down and we talk and we share, I tend to lay back and forth, and I learned that the Vietnamese man happened to be the man who organized 1968 Tet Offensive in Hue. Then many veterans say, oh, that's where I was. That's where I've been. That I fight, and I almost kill you. And the conversation start to lose up, and more beer and more drinking, and starting to laugh and starting to cry and starting to share. And that is the point for me that the two countries have to come together. And that is the time for me to see I must do what I need to bring the two families together, because the Vietnamese have, at that point, still Vietnamese have nothing against American. And everywhere we see that when they say you American or you Russian, we say, oh, we, the Americans say, no, we American. Everybody happy. Everybody say, welcome back. And the Vietnamese open arm for welcoming American into the family. Now, today we're talking about 1988. That is before the embargo was lifted and all that. And yet we're able to go there and to, I have to say, those veterans are very brave to go there and to face the condition, the challenge and everything. And from that point on, I have not changed my mind. I'm still doing that for the last 40 years. And I'm so happy to see our two countries at it today. We still have some to go yet, but at least we started and we make it happen.
Chuck, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Thanks for getting up.
Sure why I got
the crack of dawn here. That actually, I mean, it's a perfect segue to bring you into the conversation, because I remember you saying at one point that your own decision to come back to Vietnam in '94 was very influenced by meeting Lê Ly, I think when her film came out in '93. So given what she's just said, I mean, that sets you up perfectly, I think, to talk about how, as one of those veterans she's describing, you made that decision to go back, confront the past, meet other veterans, meet Vietnamese veterans. How did you experience that period?
Well, when I was in Vietnam during wartime for 1967 and 68, unlike some of my buddies in my unit, I did not have a disparaging attitude toward our Vietnamese colleagues. I liked the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese soldiers that we worked with, and the Vietnamese in Saigon on the streets that I encountered every day. I always thought during that 1 year period of military service in Vietnam that someday I would like to come back to Vietnam at a time of peace. It didn't seem like a practical possibility when I was back in the U.S. and out of the Army and back at the university. But with my anti-war activities, I sort of reconnected with Vietnam, and the idea of coming back loomed again. And then luckily for me, an old Army buddy came through Atlanta for a convention, and we had dinner together. By the end of that dinner, we decided we were going to come back as tourists, and we did. Actually, that was in 1992, And then I believe when I met Lei Lee in Atlanta for the film showing of When Heaven and Earth Change Places, I believe what really brought us together then was a shared experience of reconnecting with Vietnam, and Lei Lee was a wonderful reinforcement for me of everything positive about that.
And when you got to Hanoi, end of 94, I guess, beginning of 95, you must have been one of the very first who went back to settle with any sense of staying for a long time.
I think so, yeah. At that time, from the very beginning, when I came back to Vietnam in 1995 and settled and started working here, I very quickly joined the American Chamber of Commerce, which was a little bit unusual back in those days. The NGO community, the nonprofits, humanitarian organizations didn't normally join the Chamber of Commerce, but in that case, I thought it made some sense, and it did, because I connected with a lot of people in the foreign community in Vietnam. But the engagement with the business community and the wider U.S. and international community really opened a lot of doors, and it indicated to me really how eager everyone was to rebuild the relationship. And so all of us became kind of part of the team, supplementing and augmenting the U.S. Embassy and what they were doing. Actually, we may have been quite a bit ahead of the embassy in regard to our attitudes about reconnecting with Vietnam. But there was a lot of excitement in the air those days, a lot of passion for really coming together with the Vietnamese and finding the positive aspects of our lives here together and conveying that to others. And I think it was, I think we, partly because of our eagerness to do this, we did a pretty good job of it.
Susan, you came in really pretty much at a similar time, maybe a year or two before Chuck, but again, you brought a different aspect of this experience as the daughter of a vet. Your father was an officer in I Corps during the war, and you were much younger, a different generation from, well, slightly different generation from Chuck and from other veterans, obviously, who went back. But from that perspective, when you saw it, did you begin to see then on those first trips you did in the 90s how you might carve out a place for yourself that could contribute in some way to what Chuck is describing for the future?
Yeah, when I first went back, it was really to try to get an understanding about why my father had to go to Vietnam for 2 tours before I was the age of 5. In fact, he was there in Saigon the same time Chuck was. So had gone through the Tet Offensive when it hit Saigon. So I really wanted to try to get an understanding of what was so important about Vietnam that my father and 50, had to go to Vietnam, and we lost over 58,000 American lives, and millions of Vietnamese, Lao, and Cambodians. So that was my sort of first impetus for going. It was in 1991. It was at that time, it was very difficult to travel. I mean, it had just opened up to American tourists to travel. In fact, one of the first things I learned in Vietnamese was "Tôi không phải người Liên Xô, tôi là người Mỹ," was I'm not a Russian, I'm an American. And once I said that people, Vietnamese, particularly young Vietnamese, would just come to you and start talking to you. They wanted to practice their English with you. And the energy and their hope for the future was so contagious that I knew, though there was still scars of the war everywhere, as Lei Lee mentioned, the youth were what were bringing me, making me wanting to go back, because I was studying. I hadn't yet started studying international education, but at Smith I was an education major, and so I was really interested in trying to understand how Vietnam was going to adapt to this new opening to the world, both through economy and politics, how that was going to translate into how they were educating their children, because it was a complete different um, different world than Vietnam during the war, and then Vietnam pre Doi Moi. So that was my first instinct, and then I went back eventually to NYU and met up with John McAuliffe at the Fund for Reconciliation and Development, and I started to get introduced to many of the NGOs who were working in Vietnam at the time. I may have met Layli at one of the conferences there. I can't quite recall, though I read her book, so that was a big influence on me as well. And as I got more interested in what was happening in the development context, and fostering relations between the two countries, I started going down that path. But the original reason I wanted to go was my father always talked about how beautiful Vietnam was. He always talked about how he felt so awful that the US had treated Vietnam terribly after the war, that they didn't go in like they went into Europe to help post-war development, or what they did in Japan, because we also spent time in Okinawa when I was a child. And so he really felt that Vietnam needed the assistance from the US post-war, and he felt horrid that that was not happening. And that was what really drew me to the country in the first place. But it was the people I met there that kept me there, and has kept me there for the last 35 or so years now.
Yeah, I mean, Quay Mai, that really sets you up in a sense, because you were one of those young people that Susan is describing. You're of that generation. You're getting the chance to go to the West to study, to Australia. You're being exposed to all these influences at a very, very impressionable age, where young people are exploring their opportunities, their options. How do you recall that period?
I think to recall that period, I want to talk about my early childhood experience. Like I remember one of the first memories I have is playing hide and seek in a bomb shelter in my home village in Ninh Bình. And I remember, my grandpa told me stories of how, this bomb shelter protected him and our family from French troops and American troops. And I remember, when I was 6 years old, I traveled with my parents from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. And along the way, I saw bomb craters so large. They occupy, many larger than many rice fields together. And when we crossed the Hien Lung Bridge that divided our country for more than 20 years, so many people started crying. And the child being me, a 6 years old me, like soaked in all those tears and remember on all this pain. And I remember all the mothers from North Vietnam or South Vietnam were waiting for the return of their loved ones. And one day when I was going to school, I saw a commotion ahead of me. And then it was like, I think it was in the early 90s, when the war had ended for so many years. And I ran towards that commotion, and I saw the body of a woman dangling from a tree. And when they lowered her, I recognized her. She was a street seller of sweet potato and manioc. And my mom often bought sweet potato and manioc from her because she had told my mom that two of her sons had gone to war and hadn't come back. And the day that she decided to take her life, hope had ran out for her. And I feel like she took with her the hope for peace to another world. Maybe she stopped believing that there could be, peace on our world. And I remember when I was a small girl standing on my village, I was looking at the devastation around me, at the women waiting for their loved ones, about people people who had lost their arms and legs. And I told myself as a little girl, the human race would not be so stupid as to wage another war. Just look at this. And as a little girl, I sincerely, I believed in that. And I remember, like in the 90s, after I had gotten a scholarship and gone to Australia to study, I came back to Vietnam with my Australian host family. And we were in Quảng Trị and we were sitting by the roadside. We was drinking tea when a woman ran towards us. She was totally naked. She was screaming to my Australian friends to return her husband and her children to her. And we didn't know what was going on. And when the villagers pulled her away, they told us that the bombs had killed her whole family. And from that day, she had gone crazy. And every day, she searched for her husband and her children. And she often screamed their names. So I wrote this poem in her to honor her pain and the pain of all the mothers all over Vietnam and the mothers of all over the world who have lost their children and family to war. May I read this short poem?
Sure, please.
Quảng Trị. Người mẹ chạy về phía chúng tôi, tên hai đứa con tràn hai hốc mắt. Mẹ gào lên con tôi ở đâu? Người mẹ chạy về phía chúng tôi, tên chồng mẹ lõm sâu lồng ngực. Mẹ gào lên trả chồng cho tôi. Nắng héo đôi vai xác xơ tóc trắng. Trời sập nắng kéo lê tôi trên những quãng đường chi chít hố bom, mắt người chết toang hoác mở, những ruộng đồng nẻ khô thôi thóp thở. Hoa phượng loan tươi đỏ những con đường, còn sâu hoắm vết thương Quảng Trị. Quảng Trị. The mother runs towards us. The names of her children fill her eye sockets. She's screaming, "Where are my children?" The mother runs towards us. Her husband's name carves a hole in her chest. She's screaming, "Return my husband to me." Time fades her shoulders. Her red hair withers. Sky spreads sunlight, dragging me along the roads, carpeted with bomb craters, like the eyes of the dead, wide open, staring. The dry, cracked fields struggle to find their breath. Flamboyant flowers shed their blood along the road, still so deep the wounds. Quảng Trị. Whenever I think about this mother, I'm just so grateful for the effort of Renew, of Chuck, of Friends of Vietnam, who have been working so hard to remove unexploded bombs. I mean, millions tons of bombs will drop onto Vietnam. And now, children still die, farmers still die, and it's unacceptable. And I'm just honored to be in this panel. And I thank you, Cô Lee, George, Susan, to many people, to the people who love Vietnam and who love peace, who are working so hard to rebuild, our human spirit.
The poem is really beautiful, and it raises another question, which both you and Lê Ly, maybe Lê Ly wants to take this one next. How is it that out of experiences like that, many of them personal, I mean, the experiences of your grandmother, the experiences of the French and Japanese wars and the famine and the land reform, and then the horrific experiences you experienced personally, Lê Ly, somehow both of you and other writers of your generation, and I would add also some American veteran writers, some very fine veteran writers who came out of that experience and actually dealt with the damage they themselves had caused. I mean, I'm thinking of writers like Wayne Carlin or Bill Earhart, other poets and novelists. How is it possible? I'll start with you, Lê Ly, to go through an experience and reflect on things like that, and yet extract from that the kind of grace and optimism and a sense of redemption that is really what comes through all of your work. I mean, reading your novels is not just a terrible immersion in some horrible things in the past. I mean, it gives you a sense of being uplifted, of finding something transcendent. How is that as a writer for you and for the American veteran writers that you've worked with?
As you know, I born in late 1949 or early 50. And from first 5 years, the Vietnamese fought against the French. And in those 5 years, I was the youngest daughter of 6 children in my family. And my brothers and 3 sisters and mother always sung for me on those songs, just like what Grandma just read. And those songs, it created by the villager. They saw the situation, the very sad or very suffering, or it just hurt so deep that they create a song, even though they could not read or write, but yet they memorized. And then they sung for their children and their grandchildren. And that is how it go on and on. So in first 5 years of my life, even though I'm just a baby, rocked by my family in a cradle, all those songs, it memorized to me up until today, still to today. Then by 1955, when I was 5 years old, the South Vietnamese government stood up and they did everything opposite. On the song, on the poetry, on the poem, they write again about Vietnam, Viet Minh, and the Viet Cong and the communists. So then I have to recreate all the song, learn all the new song, and have to be switched on both sides, because the early song is about Viet Minh against the French. But then the later on about the South Vietnamese against the Viet Minh and the Viet Cong. So in those songs, it just say everything, the feeling and the cry and the suffering of mother and sister. I had 2 sisters whose husband went to North in 1954. My own brother, Bong Nghệ, went to North in 1954. But then my brother Sao went to join the Viet Cong in 1960 or 61. I witnessed how my mother and how my sister and hundreds of those Vietnamese villagers who sent their daughters, their sons, and their husband to the North. One or not, they left, they just gone, just volunteered to go. Supposed to be 2 years. Nobody know that it end up for 20 years before they can come back. So to witness all the suffering, the love, to see mother and crying and bearing their son and wounded the body and spear because of the become refugee and lost the land and destroy the graveyard and temple. I mean, all of these things I just witnessed from 1955 to 1965, those 10 years. It's just so hard to describe. I am sure that American wife and mother and sister have the same feeling that my mother and sister feel, because we're human. And everything, it touches us all. And so we have no choice. I mean, we can't leave the village. I did because I must go. But most of my father, like my father and uncles and auntie, the son and daughter went to North and went to South, but they have to remain in the village because of the land, because of the graveyard, because of the worship, the ancestor, and all of these things. It's so much for us to live on. That's all we have. We don't have anything except the rice paddy, the water buffalo, and the children to work on the land. And the war came, everything just turned upside down and inside out. And I know it, many Vietnamese cried for their lot in 1975 when the North took over the South, and they lost the mansion, they lost the beach houses and the maid and the car and the money in the bank and the gold and I mean, whatever. I lost 10 years before that. I lost my water buffalo, I lost my duck, my chicken, my pig, my dog, my cat. I lost my beautiful river and mountain and the beaches. I mean, all those things. It means so much to me and to the villager who need those land and those things to survive day after day. So the war, it just really turned everything upside down and inside out. And we be refugee overnight in our own village, in our own country. It's just so sad. It's just so sad.
You know what I find so interesting about reading your work and Kwe Mai's work is that none of this ever becomes an opportunity for propaganda of saying that side or this side was evil. It's all, this is the horror of war. I mean, it reminds me of Bao Nin's book, The Sorrow of War, that you're not using that experience, describing, reflecting on that experience to point fingers at, I mean, everyone in a sense who participates in the wars, whether it's, you know, the land reformers in When the Mountains Sing, it's the Viet Cong and the Arvin soldiers that you encounter personally, it's the Americans who cause all this destruction. It becomes, you know, a universal theme rather than, you know, a politicized theme to point fingers at evil, at the perpetrators. And I think, you know, where Chuck and Susan, I think, touch on this, and every time I go, I'm not anywhere near as knowledgeable and I don't have the language skills, but whenever I go to the home of a Vietnamese family to talk about their war experiences or the family members they lost, the sons who fell in battle, South or North, you get this same thing that I think startles a lot of foreigners. I talked to a tour group who are there now, and they're having that experience that everyone does, which is, you know, that sense of grace and redemption and forgiveness is actually not just restricted to artists and poets. It's something that is staggering to encounter as a foreigner visiting. Susan, Chuck, I mean, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Either of you?
Sure, you're on mute.
Chuck, you're on mute. Do you want to take it, Susan?
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, that's the sense you get. And I mean, I think the Vietnamese are very practical people in general. I mean, it's, of course, you know, you can't say every single one, but they're very pragmatic and very practical. And I mean, you can understand that I always hear from Vietnamese that they never blame the American people for what happened during the war. They understood, you know, that this was a decision that was happening at the government level. But at the same time, you know, as an American who goes back to Vietnam and works on war legacy issues, I always say, well, the US government is responsible for the impacts of the war, and American people are responsible for telling their government that they need to do more, that our voice needs to be raised, and we need to educate those in power who can make the decisions to address the impacts of that war. And that's what I've done with Chuck and with Lady and with so many other organizations for more than 30 years, is to remind people that here in the US, that we need to clean up the mess that we left behind in Vietnam. We are partially responsible for that because we are American citizens, and our government did this in our name, so they need to address the impacts in our name as well.
Chuck, maybe you could say just a couple of things about how you have observed and taken part in the efforts by veterans to do what Susan's talking about, to actually deal as you do day after day, day in, day out with ordinary people in villages, in Quang Tri, in Chetianhui, in Quang Binh, wherever, who were bombed, who did lose family members, who are disabled, who have children who were affected by exposure to Agent Orange. And that area has been really attracted an extraordinary number of veterans, individuals who come with a little money to want to help, other organizations, organized groups. I know people from the 101st Airborne who have gone back regularly to the Ashore Valley and Hamburger Hill and are motivated. You know, first of all, they may come to see the graves or the battlefields where they fought, but then it becomes an initiative to do things like, you know, bringing bicycles to poor families in the Ashore Valley, or countless things that they do. Talk a little bit about that for a couple of minutes.
Well, you and Susan have both described it very accurately. The Vietnamese have an amazing graciousness in their attitude toward us, Americans especially, but any international visitors. But in the relationship between Vietnam and the U.S., the Vietnamese, with a lot of grace and humility, say, well, it was a long time ago. It was not your fault. The U.S. government made the wrong decisions, but eventually the American people forced the U.S. government to stop the war, and we respect that. We have great affection for the American people as a result. And Americans find it astonishing that the Vietnamese would be so gracious and graceful, and especially veterans. You know, I think most veterans, American veterans, share this compelling need to come back to Vietnam and try somehow to reconnect and somehow to right wrongs of the past, although we can't really do that, but we can make an effort, and it's a form of redemption, I think, for all of us. And the Vietnamese not only allow that, but they encourage that with their wonderful attitude, which is not to forget the past. They very much remember the sacrifices of those who came before them, and they respect that. But they're not trapped in the past. They are more concerned with today and tomorrow and the future of their children, future generations. And at the same time, they are so astonishingly kind in their willingness to embrace American veterans and help us get past our memories and our sense of guilt, which Susan has described accurately, really as responsibility, which I think is a better term. We do, as Americans, have a responsibility to help the Vietnamese recover from the war. And luckily for us, the Vietnamese allow that in such a transcendent way that we really find that there are wonderful, deep bonds that connect us. And it really has helped to define the current relationship that we have between Vietnam and the U.S. And it's something that so many times will bring tears to the eyes of veterans who are being forgiven and being told that there's a life ahead of us and that we can make a better life for future generations. It's a wonderful phenomenon, and it has been such a powerful healing tool for American veterans. And I hope that it has also reflected something of benefit for the Vietnamese people and their graciousness toward us.
Well, one thing I find really interesting is that, you know, you and Susan and many others, the work that you do at that level of dealing with ordinary Vietnamese people day to day also brings you into the political realm of dealing with the American embassies, successive ambassadors, the State Department, other parts of the US government, and turning that work and those developments, which I suppose are all really about trust above anything else. How you build from dealing with war legacies, the kind of trust that then has actually allowed the two governments at that level to make really an extraordinary amount of progress to the point where, you know, we now have a situation, and I want to come to the situation right now today because it is suddenly quite different. But until this January, you know, to have this partnership, which they call a comprehensive strategic partnership between the United States and Vietnam, it's the same level of diplomatic cooperation that Vietnam has with the principal countries that helped it through the war, Russia, former Soviet Union, and China. And it embraces everything. It embraces trade, it embraces the environment, climate change, medical assistance, educational support. And, you know, I think there's a particularly eloquent description of this process from one of the many, you know, good and enlightened American ambassadors that we've been lucky enough to have in the past few years. And if people don't know it, Ted Osius's book, Nothing is Impossible, he was really instrumental, I think, in many ways to not only enacting a lot of that, but understanding the logic of it. It's a very interesting book from the inside. So in your dealings with government officials, congressional officials, how do you, Susan, and to the degree you've also seen it in your spheres, Lê Ly and Quế Mai, making that transition from the human to the political superstructure level, if you like?
Yeah, it's
Well-
been kind of amazing, really. I mean, Chuck and I remember the dark days of working on the Agent Orange issue, and of course Chuck before that on the unexploded ordnance issue. And we could spend a whole seminar talking about how we got from there to here. But in some days I'm amazed that we have gotten this far, especially because the Agent Orange issue was very, very sensitive. I mean, the environmental side, not as much, though there was concern that there may be the whole country of the southern part of Vietnam may be contaminated by these herbicides. And when that was proven not to be true, the focus needed to be on the former US military bases. That opened up the ability for the US and Vietnam to cooperate on this issue. And it took a long time then, though, to get them to address the human health impacts. There was a lot of denial from the US government side that we had to fight for. But it happened. I mean, over time, thanks again greatly to Senator Leahy and Tim Reeser for putting money into the budget that the USAID and the embassy had to deal with. We pushed them, all of us advocating on this issue, were able to push them into really addressing the human health aspects of Agent Orange. And working together on that very, very sensitive issue where two sides were so far apart just in 25 years ago, to where now most ambassadors state that it's one of the reasons that we do have this strategic comprehensive partnership, is because that trust was built by working together to address something very complex, very sensitive. But it took time, and it took a lot of efforts by many people, and groups like Lê Ly, who started very early on working directly with families impacted by the war, showed that things could be done to help people. And that was important as well, that you had to show success.
Yeah.
So many organizations started working with families, including my own, and Project Renew, to show that there was something that could be done. And that also helped encourage more funding to address these issues. But without facing that legacy of the war, I don't think we would be in the partnership we are today.
May I add something? I used to volunteer in orphanages where, children deformed by Agent Orange were staying. It was heartbreaking for me to see the extent of the pain, of the suffering. And, you know, children are still being born in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, deformed because of Agent Orange. And it is unacceptable that the companies who produce Agent Orange, who reaped billions of dollars from profit, have done nothing to compensate for the victims. And I mean, we have heard about the court case of Mrs. Chan Thị Tố Nga. She lost her own daughter, and she's been spending a whole life fighting for the justice of not herself, but for millions of Agent Orange victims, you know, in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So talking about taking responsibility, you know, I think not just the government, but also companies who reap so much profit from the war. And I think, you know, I'm working with 3 organizations that deal with the impact of war, and I'm donating 100% of proceeds of my book, my current poetry collection, The Current Peace, to Renew, to Peace Tree Vietnam, to the Dole Fund, who has many projects helping Agent Orange victims. And I think maybe, you know, I'm sad with the current political situation, and the only thing we can do is to take action individually. You know, we don't let the politicians run our life anymore. We stand up and take actions, and you know, there are friends who are joining force with us, who are, you know, doing their small part, so that, you know, we have a Vietnamese proverb: một cây làm chẳng nên non, 3 cây chụm lại nên hòn núi cao. A tree can't make a hill. 3 trees together rise into a high mountain. And, you know, individual efforts, however small, will make a big difference.
Well, let's get to the present day. I'm sorry, did you want to add something, Lily?
Yeah, I just want to continue with what Nguyễn might just say. The first time I walked in the Từ Dũ Hospital in Ho Chi Minh City in 1988 with a group of veterans, and they have the whole room of the little baby, 2-3 head and different body sit in the yard and looking at me. I mean, I still have the photo, and it just haunts me every time talking about Agent Orange and how that affects the human. And so from that point on, after that, I visit many homes who had children, even 1 or 2 children have Agent Orange, and it just, you know, karma, we believe in karma. So I always ask myself what these people have done in their past life, that now that they have to endure so much like that. It's not just them, the whole family. And the people like us come in and just spend an hour or 2 and walk away. They've been there for day in and day out, and it's just, how can you talking about karma and how can we heal? And that is what I just come back from Da Nang, and I did something to healing for Vietnamese. We're not only the healing the physical body, but we also healing on the spirit and the soul. Because if they're happy and if they harmonize with the living, we have a better chance to survive through many things right now as we see. And so this year, it became a very special year for all of us. That was March 8, 1965, when the first American Marine landed right on the Red Beach in Da Nang. And then the 29th of March, 10 years later, the Americans had to withdraw from Da Nang. And then 30 years, the US and Vietnam have fully diplomat. But then 1 year, the American government give the Vietnam veteran a day. They call it the Vietnam Veteran Day. I don't know, you know that, but it's just 1 year ago. So all of this, it makes me think, how can we do more than just do what we've been doing for the last 40 years? And so we create a ceremony right at the Red Beach with the 4 Buddhist monks. And we have the chanting, and we try to pick up those souls that die in the water as well, that all around in Da Nang for the last 100 years, not just American War, but before that and before that. So we bring all those souls back to the temple in the land so that there can be peace. Some did not want to go to the temple. Some say, I want to go to the church. And others say, yeah, I want to go home. But most of them happy to get out of the water and have a place to come in and not become soulless and lonely and to call hungry goat. And so at least this year, I just did that, and Chuck was there with me, and I'm just so happy that many veterans like Chuck that have been there and witnessed what we done, because after death, it not end. It just continually. So if we cannot keep love and keep a little bit of thinking of them and thank them and gratitude toward them what they have done, I think it also help us to healing too. So I just want to
I
share
think this
that.
this has been wonderful in sort of picking up where we started, which is to center the conversation in the experience of Vietnamese civilians. It's really been in everything you've all been saying from your different perspectives. We're at an hour, it's 8 o'clock, and there are quite a few questions coming in online, but I also, before we get to those, just want to bring it up to the present day politically. There was a big conference last weekend, which Susan was at. I wasn't able to go, but at Texas Tech University for the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, the fall of Saigon. And Andrew Wells Dang, who is, all of us know, the Vietnam director at the U.S. Institute of Peace, gave a keynote speech and said that he wondered if we were now at a moment he called an inflection point in 2025 in this history that's in some way comparable to 1975. We all know we're in a new world in the last 3 months. Things are happening that are worse and faster than I think any of us anticipated. And USIP itself, which has been for the last 3 or 4 years, really the organizing hub of a lot of these activities, USAID and government initiatives to deal with war legacies. USIP has been physically occupied, taken over. All its staff have been fired. Its board has been removed and replaced, we probably most of us know, by young kids from Elon Musk's operation. We now have a 28-year-old with no government experience from his team running that. Yet at the same time, what's interesting is the destruction of USAID, which has been central to the whole process of funding not only war reconciliation, war legacy issues, but growing out of that other programs that I mentioned to do with improving healthcare, to do with education, climate change, the environment. Those have all been eradicated. And yet the war legacies work, most of it, if not all of it, at least for now, the funding seems to be continuing. And we could spend a lot of time discussing why that is so. I think perhaps even the Trump administration, in its complete lack of any understanding of how American influence and goodwill operate in the world, even they have not killed, at least not yet, the principal funding for the major war legacies programs, the cleanup of the dioxin at the Bien Hoa Air Base, which is partly funded by the Pentagon. It's a Vietnamese military base, and I think they probably recognize that there is some utility there because it's about the defense of Vietnam against Chinese influence in the South China Sea, the East Sea. The disabilities programs, for now at least, thankfully seem to be continuing. We don't know for how long. But as you contemplate this 50 years later, what are your fears? What are your hopes? And how do you think we continue to get to the layers of reconciliation that are still unfinished, very unfinished? and I think particularly of the relationship between the Vietnamese American diaspora and Vietnam, and the lingering lack of reconciliation between South and North. One of the programs that USIP has worked on, and Ambassador Ted Osius, whom I mentioned, has been very important in this, is the rehabilitation, the preservation of the great cemetery in Bien Hoa, Bien An, which houses the graves of South Vietnamese ARVN War Day, who have never been honored or recognized and are still looked down upon. So it seems to me there's a lot to be done, and each of you is involved in an area that is very oriented to the future as well as the past. Just very quickly, a minute, perhaps 2 minutes at most, from each of you with your thoughts on that. And then I really want to get to audience questions, because there are quite a few of them, and our time is running a little short. Who wants?
Yeah, I'll start on the Agent Orange issue. That was, you're right that most of the cleanup, at least, I have faith that the cleanup will continue. It's a huge amount of the funding. And there's still another about 5 to 10 years left of that project. My concern more is the disability programs. Many of the ones that were continued, they got this waiver, are actually ending in May or June. And one that that the Vietnam Assistance for the Handicapped was running, which is a Vietnamese American organization, one of the first who started work in Vietnam shortly after Lê Ly did with her organization. That program was eliminated. I mean, it was supposed to end anyhow at the end of 2025, but my fear is that once those programs phase out, they're not going to continue. I mean, that is a big concern I have. And we had just made some project progress, thanks to your article, George, in the New York Times about Agent Orange in Laos. That project in the sprayed region of Laos was just beginning, and that was completely canceled. It was a program to provide disability for people in Vietnam, in Laos, not just those impacted by Agent Orange, but also those impacted by unexploded ordnance that World Education had been doing for more than 5 years. And they had just started their new second 5-year cycle, and that was completely gutted. So that's one of my big concerns, is that we still have a big fight, I think, to keep these programs going. And they're, you know, programs that are dealing with people with disabilities are much harder, I think, to explain in this current political environment, sadly, than helping the Vietnamese military, who you want to have a good relationship with, clean up a former military base.
Yeah. Chuck, from the point of view of your programs and others in Quang Tri and other heavily bombed areas on UXO removal? Chuck? Are you hearing us?
On now. Okay, sorry, I forgot to remove the mute. I've actually given a lot of thought to this, and without coming up with any great solutions. However, it occurs to me that because of the chaos in Washington, I really don't expect things to be normal in the conventional sense for quite a long time. And maybe we have to look at some alternative tracks for cooperation, for funding, for activities related to war legacies, particularly, which I think, as George mentioned, still has quite a lot of support among the American people to deal with the responsibilities of the war. But most of you probably know that our colleagues at Norwegian People's Aid, NPA, got their start around, well, it's almost a century ago, but with the labor unions in Norway. There was no Norwegian People's Aid, there was no USAID, or no DFID, or no comparable organizations at the time the labor movement in Norway got together and spontaneously began this international assistance program to deal with everything from natural disasters to wartime interventions. And eventually it grew into what was the de facto international aid arm of the Norwegian government. It's still independent, but they work closely with the Norwegian government. It's a large organization in 30 countries with about 3,000 employees, I think. But maybe we are forced to look at some alternatives such as that in the U.S. If the Trump administration is going to ensure that there's total chaos for quite a long time into the future, maybe some alternatives such as assembling the various nonprofit organizations that have worked together in the past in a more cohesive unit in which we all participate and we all help raise funds and all work together to realize the outcomes that we want. I'm just throwing that out onto the table as a possibility for discussion. It seems to me we might have to look at some creative alternatives now. The conventional approach, I think it's clear for a while, is not going to work. And I think we have to face that reality.
That actually relates to one of the questions that's popped up on the Q&A, but maybe I'll hold that for a minute. It's a somewhat more technical question, but I think it's worth coming back to from someone who is involved in NGO support activity in Vietnam. But Quay Mai and Lê Ly, from the perspective you have on the other question I raised, which is this frustrating situation that after all these years, reconciling with the United States has been an easier process in many ways than reconciling among Vietnamese and with Vietnamese Americans in the diaspora. Do you see hope for further steps or other concrete measures right now that can begin to make more progress on that side of the problem?
Yes, you know, when my book first came out in 1989 and the movie came out in 1993, the Vietnamese community boycotts, protests, not accept anything I say, and give me a lot of heartache and problem for raising funds to help Vietnamese people in Vietnam. But at the time went by now, book come out like Quay Mai and many other Vietnamese writers come out, talk about it. You know, everything okay. There's, you know, some that support or not, but still they calm down than it used to be. The second thing that the generation who born and raised in United States, or when they came here when they were very young, now they're well educated. They can read English. They can travel to Vietnam. They can join in a politics to do own kind of a whole own kind of office work. This is I looking forward for that generation who can able to help Vietnam and United States come even better and stronger relationship, because they have to understand that this country give them so much wealth, some of them. And what we have been doing in U.S. in Vietnam for the last 40 years, we did all the infrastructure. We built 6 hospitals, university, school, cleaning water. I mean, from A to Z, we did, you know, many NGO joined and did it. Now the Vietnamese in Vietnam are very wealthy. They sure stand up and take it over and continue to help us to clean up the mess, whatever it needs to be done, and do it. Their children come to United States study and study well, and they did very well. They also need to go back to help lead the country to a better future. And we already got finished, but they should take it over and make it move with everything. So that way we can step back and just say, now it's your turn to take care of your people. That's what I'm hoping for.
When you go around now, Quay Mai, doing readings and promotions for your book, Are you getting a lot of response from Vietnamese American readers and visitors?
Yeah, I echo what cô Lệ Lý said. I have hope for the younger generation, and I think I have been very moved by the response from the diasporic Vietnamese community about the Mountain Sing, which is a story of a northern Vietnamese family set in Hanoi. And many Vietnamese Americans told me that they had never read a story from a Hanoi family before because they considered them the enemy, and I think the weapon for peace is really humanization. If we humanize people, then we see, that people are just more similar than different, so the weapon for wars is dehumanization, and the weapon for peace is humanization. And I think, like I documented in my book, in Vietnam, so many Vietnamese families had families who fought against each other,
Mhm.
North against the South. And I mean, because of all that killings, injuring, conflicting pain onto each other, forgiveness is very difficult. And I hope there would be more forums where we bring, people inside Vietnam and diasporic Vietnamese together and have conversations and listen to each other and engage in thoughtful dialogues. And I think, and talking about reconciliation among the Vietnamese, because like there are so many people missing now in Vietnam, whether they fought on the northern side or the southern side. I mean, because we don't have a DNA bank. So I know so many people who are still looking for the remains of their loved ones. And there have been American veterans coming back to Vietnam trying to help locate mass graves. And mass graves are found, but there is no way to identify who these people are, So we need international support to have the technology to have a DNA system, a DNA bank in Vietnam as well. And there is another layer of trauma that is often not talked about, which is the trauma of mixed race children born out of the Vietnam War, which I documented in my second novel, Dust Child. And I mean, tens of thousands of those mixed race children are still looking for their parents. And some American veterans don't even know that they had children in Vietnam. So and these veterans may not have much time anymore. So I mean, the support that the community can lend to these children of war, is very urgent and much needed as well. So when talking about healing and reconciliation, there have been groups that have been, not receiving enough attention, and I hope, like at forums like this, we bring together voices from different groups so that we understand much better, much deeper the different aspects of reconciliation, of healing that need to take place.
So coming back, Chuck and Susan, I said there was a question in the list here that is a more technical question, but it's actually an interesting one in light of what you just said, Chuck. A lot of the other questions, of which there are quite a few, I think actually touch in one way or another on the very things we've been talking about. So I hope people who ask questions about the current state of USAID, war legacy support programs will be tolerant if I don't go into each of those individually. But the question that somebody raised who has an active NGO presence in Vietnam, I know, asked a technical question about how consolidation of provinces in Vietnam, I guess, at an administrative level, might influence and perhaps dovetail with what you were saying, Chuck, the way that organization among NGOs toward the future might change. Either you or Susan, you want to say something about that?
That's a very difficult question to answer just because the Vietnamese government does not really share much information with us about how they're organizing these new administrative units. they're hoping to make the governance in Vietnam more efficient, and I wish them luck in that. I hope they can do it. But the end result will be that about 64 provinces will be reduced to 30. I don't have the numbers correct, but around 60 provinces will be reduced down to around 30. And that means that a lot of administrative units will be consolidated, and it's going to be a difficult transition, I think, for a lot of people for quite some time, but the Vietnamese will finally make it all work out, I think. This is also going to require probably new agreements, new protocols between international organizations and the Vietnamese, and how we work with each other. But the truth is there's no very clean description that can be offered at this time.
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about because it has slowed down our work there right now. One of our projects is the Bob Feldman Fund, which is a fund that was started by Bob and Nancy Feldman after Bob got very ill from cancer that he was exposed to Agent Orange during his service in Bien Hoa. And we've been organizing this fund with the Quang Nam Red Cross for 17 years now. And just one family, I'm always amazed about this, because one family has generated through donations over $500,000 to help over 640 families in Vietnam who've been impacted by Agent Orange. And every time I visit the family, I just think of what one person can do, and to lead to such an impact. And the families are always so moved that this funding is coming from a family in the US who has been impacted by Agent Orange. But this process of changeover and consolidating has slowed down our partners, the Quang Nam Red Cross, in able to get the permission to finally transfer the funds to get this last round going. And we finally got it yesterday, thank God.
Oh,
but
good.
Quang Nam province is going to merge with Da Nang City, and it's going to be called Da Nang City. So what that means now with our partners we've been working with for 17 years is Da Nang Red Cross going to supersede them, and our partners for the last 17 years going to be interrupted? I don't know. I'm going there next week, so I'm hoping I can find out, because we have really developed a strong working relationship. And that's true for most NGOs who've been there for a very long time. And there will be some rocky road for a while, but it'll work its way out, because the Vietnamese always find a way to make things work. So
we're running now. I'm looking at my clock anxiously here. It's 8:23. We've got 7 minutes. I want to give each of you literally 1 minute just to say something in by way of a closing statement. But there's one question I didn't want to leave out from one of the audience. It's out of left field in a sense, but I think it's actually sort of related to what we're saying. Floods of Americans go there now. They love the place, they engage, they learn about Vietnam, about the history. But the question is mass tourism and over-commercialization going to transform Vietnam in negative ways? And I have to say, every time I go to Hoi An or Ha Long Bay or, the Bana Hills Resort, I have that concern, I must admit. Very quickly, does anyone have a thought on that? And then we'll get to the closing remarks from each of you.
It's not only tourists, but the government take the land, the rice paddy, and build up all the concrete and cement. Now the village don't even have land to raise the cow, and they cannot raise the cow because cow poo on the street. Yeah. And so they don't like that tour to see that. So that is another sad thing that I see about Vietnam, that nothing I can do about it.
Anyone else have a thought on that?
Oh.
Yes, I think that that's the cost of development. I remember visiting some Hmong villages, and the Hmong people at that village, instead of selling their traditional products, they were selling things that they bought from China. So it's cheaper, and they don't have time to weave anymore, and that's really sad. So I think you know, as a tourist, I mean, the question is, what could we do, you know? So support, you know, sustainable tourism projects, and also, you know, like don't engage in activities that that support this commercialization of tourism in Vietnam. But it's very difficult because I've seen it happen in so many places. It's not just Vietnam, and Vietnam is changing too fast.
Okay, hardest question of all. 4 minutes, 4 people, 4 statements, 1 minute each. Who wants to go first? I'm going to take you in the order you're on my screen. Chuck. Are we hearing Chuck?
No, he's muted.
Chuck,
Yeah.
you're muted.
Sorry, I just never remember that. My hope is that the relationship between the U.S. and Vietnam, to narrow the focus to one that us Americans are concerned about, will continue to evolve and to emerge, and we will maintain this very strong friendship that we have for constructive and productive purposes in the future. There will be some ups and downs, but I think we'll never go back to where we were a few decades ago. And I think the future is bright for the U.S. and America. And thankfully, we have a lot of good people involved in this quest, including my colleagues on the panel here and George. So I think we just have to keep going on and be optimistic and be committed that we're going to prevail and make this a better world. And Vietnam is a good place to start.
Mai, you're the next one on my screen at the top here. You want to say a word?
Yeah, I hope I could be as optimistic as Chuck, but I'm really worried at the moment because, like, you know, like we have this looming fear that we will be, you know, Vietnam will have to bear the 46% tariff rate. I mean, how can Vietnamese businesses survive, you know? I have friends who have small companies and they're extremely worried. And the Vietnamese dong has lost so much value the last few weeks. Unbelievable. And people are queuing up, buying gold, and like they're panicking because we really depend on those exports, you know. I mean, there are just so many people whose jobs depend on exports out of Vietnam. So I don't know, you know, I really hope that you know, something will change and that, you know, Vietnam can keep up the momentum of this development, because so many people need some income to be able to survive.
Yeah, I'm really glad you made that point. Susan. And then
Yeah,
I'll
I
give
go
the last
back
word
and
to-
forth between being positive and being very negative for those very reasons, Guimai. But at this conference that I was at Texas Tech, I have never been to one of these conferences. You know, over the years, they often had, you know, veterans who were fighting. You know, if we'd only done this, we would have won the war. If we'd only done this, we, you know, and so I never really saw a point in going to many of them. But this conference, the agenda had so many Vietnamese Americans on it. And I found that really every single one of their presentations were just really positive, wanting to make a deeper relationship with their homeland, wanting to understand their parents. And that's another sort of schism that happens, is the young generations with their parents. And there was one question in one of the sessions that two Vietnamese Americans facilitated, and it started out with one of the panelists playing a Vietnamese musical instrument to get us into the Vietnam spirit. And they asked, the question was, what is your homeland? Where's your quê, right? And most of them, all of them would say, well, my family came from the north and settled in the south, and then we came here, and they told where they lived in the US. But almost everyone also mentioned their family's homeland, their town where they came from, as being their home as well. And I thought that was very positive, because it keeps that engagement alive. And we have so many young Vietnamese students studying here in America now, and I hope to God that continues. I worry about that too in this current situation. I hope that doesn't change. I hope they continue to come, but I fear that will be lost, at least in the short term. So I go back and forth.
Layli, I'm sorry, Susan. And Layli, finally, give us a closing word, and then we will regretfully have to say goodnight.
Thank you. Yeah, Vietnam is the first time we had 50 years at peace. Even if people very much suffering through the last 50 years because the embargo, because of the war with the Cambodia and the Chinese and all of that. Still, we have 50 years at peace that people rebuild their life and rebuild their family and structure and whatever. What we do now for next 50 years, that is up on each of us. We have helped them for the last 50 years. Now, next 50 years, yeah, many children well educated. And what we can hope for is to let passing by, rebuild the country, rebuild the future, because only thing can come together is love and compassion and forgiveness, and look it over the way that how we're gonna get along. I've been here in 1970. I sit between black and white, between Vietnam War over there and people here, but I have not seen anything like today. I mean, it is just outrageous. If we could not say anything and own the wrong thing that people didn't out there, that it hurt. It hurt Vietnamese, it hurt Central America, it hurt in Middle East. I mean, everybody at a wisdom of the 1 or 2 person in the government make a chaos out of the whole world. It just, I don't know what to say, but thank you so much.
You've given us an agenda to keep fighting. That's
yes.
We'll end on that note. It's been wonderful to see you all. Thank you, Chris, for organizing this, your staff for facilitating it, and a pleasure to see each one of you. And thank you for all who attended remotely, and good night.
Well, thank you so much.
Cảm ơn mọi người.
Cảm ơn.
Cảm ơn
And check out Quay Mai book tour.
Absolutely.
Yes,
And I'll see you in New York, Quay Mai, on the 4th.
Okay, hope to see everyone.